Harry now views himself as some type of Johnny Depp type figure. That's only going to work, Harry, once you kick Meghan to the curb and blow the whistle on her terrible behavior.
He has to accept that his wife manipulated him, that his wife was only in it for the money and the titles and the fame and the fortune and never in it for him, and that she...
Meghan Markle should be worried, Brittany, because if Harry is looking at the Johnny Depp playbook, that suggests to me...
A new wave of controversy has emerged around Prince Harry, following fresh claims published by royal author Tom Bower in his latest book. The reporting suggests that Harry's public image, business ventures, and even his charitable work have come under increasing strain, raising serious questions about his long-term strategy and decisions.
Disaster. So, Tom Bower reveals that Harry's anger that day in Japan had apparent
decision-making. According to Bower's account, one of the most striking revelations involves Harry's alleged comparison of himself to Johnny Depp. The comparison reportedly emerged during internal discussions about his declining public image and brand value. The context behind this claim is tied to Harry's involvement with his long-running charity, Centebail, and a series of behind-the-scenes challenges that reportedly unfolded during a trip to Asia. During a visit to Tokyo, which at the time appeared unclear in purpose, insiders now suggest the trip was actually aimed at securing financial backing for the organization. However, according to the reporting, the visit did not go as planned. Bower claims that what was initially intended to be a small, controlled engagement turned into a much larger public appearance involving thousands of attendees. The unexpected scale of the event reportedly frustrated Harry,
which Harry just hadn't been used to hearing because, of course, Meghan had fed him a whole load of lies. He was surrounded by terrible people like David Sherborne, his greasy,
who believed he had been placed in a situation he had not agreed to. Following the event, Harry is said to have raised concerns with senior figures connected to the charity, including its chairwoman, who then conducted a detailed assessment of his public standing. The results of that internal review, according to the book, were particularly damaging. The so-called brand audit reportedly found that Harry's reputation had declined significantly among corporate sponsors and donors. More notably, the report suggested that associations with Meghan Markle were not improving that perception. In fact, in some cases, they were seen as a negative factor. According to the findings described by Bower, several organizations expressed reluctance to be publicly linked with the Sussexes due to ongoing controversies, including their media projects and public statements. It was during these discussions, the author claims, that Harry referenced Johnny Depp as an example of a public figure who maintained commercial success despite legal battles and reputational challenges. However, advisors reportedly pushed back on that comparison. They argued that the media landscape had changed significantly and that modern corporate sponsors tend to avoid controversy rather than embrace it. In this environment, they warned, reputational damage could have a direct impact on funding and partnerships. Evidence of that shift was already visible. According to the reporting, key sponsors connected to Harry's charitable and sporting activities had begun withdrawing support. This included major financial backers who were no longer willing to be associated with ongoing media narratives surrounding the couple. For many observers, this moment represents a turning point. Royal commentators suggest that Harry may be facing a difficult reality. The strategies that worked during his time as a senior royal may no longer be effective in a more commercially driven environment. At the same time, critics argue that comparing his situation to that of a Hollywood actor like Johnny Depp overlooks fundamental differences. While Depp's career has always been rooted in entertainment, Harry's public identity has traditionally been linked to service, duty, and the royal institution. That distinction, analysts say, makes reputational challenges more complex for the Duke of Sussex. As these revelations continue to circulate, they have sparked renewed debate about Harry's future direction and whether he is prepared to adapt to the shifting realities of his public role. As more details emerge from Tom Bower's reporting, the focus has increasingly shifted toward the internal advice given to Prince Harry and whether those warnings were ultimately ignored. According to the book, One of the most critical moments came during a private review of Harry's public image, conducted by senior figures connected to his charity work. The findings, described as a brand audit, reportedly delivered a stark assessment of how he was perceived by corporate partners, donors, and the wider public. The conclusion was clear. His brand value had significantly declined. The report suggested that recent decisions, including high-profile media appearances, his memoir, and streaming projects, had contributed to growing controversy. Rather than strengthening his global appeal, these ventures were said to have made potential sponsors more cautious. Perhaps most notably, the audit reportedly indicated that associations with Meghan Markle were not helping improve that perception. In some cases, insiders claimed, her presence was seen as adding further reputational risk for organizations considering partnerships. For someone like Harry, who had spent much of his life being viewed as a popular and relatable royal, the feedback was described as a major shock. According to Bauer's account, advisors attempted to explain that the modern corporate environment operates very differently from traditional celebrity culture. Brands, they argued, are increasingly risk-averse and prefer figures who bring stability rather than controversy. One advisor reportedly told Harry that the narrative he had been presenting publicly, often centered around personal struggles and grievances, was not resonating in the way he may have expected. Instead of generating sympathy, it was creating distance between him and potential supporters. This led to a broader discussion about strategy. Advisors suggested that if Harry wanted to rebuild his reputation, he would need to shift away from what they described as a victim narrative and refocus on clear, purpose-driven initiatives. The emphasis, they argued, should be on causes rather than personal branding. Fundraising, in particular, was highlighted as an area of concern. According to the report, efforts to attract donors in the United States had become increasingly difficult. One explanation offered was that Harry's unique position, once seen as a major advantage, was no longer enough on its own. Without a strong and positive public image, even high-profile connections were not guaranteeing financial support. This reality was reinforced by tangible consequences. Several sponsors had already stepped back from involvement in projects linked to Harry. Corporate partners who once saw value in association with a royal figure were now reportedly reconsidering those relationships in light of ongoing controversies. The situation raised an important question. Was Harry receiving poor advice, or was he choosing not to follow the guidance he was given? Based on Bauer's reporting, the latter appears to be the case. Despite being presented with detailed analysis and recommendations, Harry is said to have struggled to accept the conclusions. Instead of viewing the audit as an opportunity to adjust his approach, he reportedly reacted with frustration, questioning both the findings and the process itself. For many observers, this reaction highlights a deeper challenge. Royal commentators argue that transitioning from a structured institutional role into an independent public figure requires a significant shift in mindset. Decisions that once had limited personal consequences can now directly impact reputation, finances, and long-term influence. As the debate continues, the situation surrounding Prince Harry is increasingly being seen as a case study in how quickly public perception can change and how difficult it can be to recover once that shift has taken place. As scrutiny around Prince Harry continues to intensify, further details from Tom Bauer's reporting have brought attention to a series of high-stakes interactions involving donors, executives, and key figures connected to Harry's charitable work. One of the most discussed incidents reportedly took place during a private meeting in New York, where tensions between representatives of Harry's charity and a major international supporter began to surface. According to accounts described in the book, the meeting was intended to repair a strained relationship, following earlier disagreements linked to a fundraising event in Asia. However, instead of easing tensions, the discussion appears to have made the situation worse. The report suggests that expectations around financial contributions became a central point of conflict. At a time when several sponsors had already reduced or withdrawn their support, requests for increased funding were reportedly met with frustration by those who had previously backed the initiative. Shortly after this exchange, one major sponsor is said to have ended its involvement entirely, an outcome that reportedly resulted in a significant drop in funding for the organization. For analysts following the story, this moment has been viewed as particularly revealing. It highlighted not only the financial pressures facing Harry's charitable projects, but also the challenges of maintaining long-term relationships with donors in an increasingly cautious environment. Corporate and private sponsors, experts say, are now far more sensitive to reputational risk than in previous years. At the center of the situation was feedback that Harry himself reportedly found difficult to accept. According to Bauer's account, advisors and executives had attempted to communicate that the issues facing the charity were directly linked to broader concerns about his public image. The earlier brand audit had already pointed to declining confidence among partners, and these new developments appeared to reinforce those findings. However, rather than acknowledging the connection, Harry is said to have reacted defensively. In one reported exchange, he allegedly questioned whether the internal review process itself had caused harm, suggesting that the analysis of his public standing had negatively impacted his reputation. Advisors, however, maintained that the audit had simply reflected an already existing reality rather than creating it. This distinction is seen as crucial by many observers. Public relations experts often emphasize that internal reviews are designed to identify problems, not create them. In this case, the audit's purpose was to provide a clear understanding of how Harry was being perceived externally so that corrective steps could be taken. Yet, according to the reporting, those corrective steps were not fully implemented. The situation also brought renewed attention to Harry's broader decision-making approach since stepping away from royal duties. Critics argue that a pattern has emerged in which negative outcomes are attributed to external factors rather than internal strategy. Supporters, on the other hand, suggest that the transition from royal life to independent ventures has presented unique challenges that would be difficult for anyone to navigate. Either way, the consequences appear to be tangible. The loss of financial backing, combined with growing skepticism among potential partners, has placed increased pressure on Harry's projects to demonstrate both stability and long-term value. Without that reassurance, experts say, rebuilding trust with donors could prove difficult. At the same time, these developments have added another layer to the ongoing debate about Harry's public role. Is he still operating within the framework of a traditional royal figure, or has he fully transitioned into a private individual navigating the competitive world of global media and philanthropy? As these questions remain unresolved, the events described in Bauer's book suggest that the challenges facing Prince Harry are not only about public perception, but also about how that perception directly impacts influence, credibility, and financial support. As debate surrounding Prince Harry continues to unfold, attention has now shifted toward one of his most high-profile projects, the Invictus Games. Once widely praised as a powerful platform supporting injured veterans, recent reporting has raised questions about how the event is currently being presented to the public. According to claims detailed by Tom Bauer, internal concerns have emerged over whether the original focus of the Invictus Games has gradually shifted. The event, which was initially designed to highlight the resilience and recovery of service personnel, is now being discussed in some circles as increasingly centered around media attention. One of the key criticisms highlighted in the reporting is the level of visibility given to Meghan Markle during recent appearances. According to former organizers and observers cited in the book, there is a perception that media coverage has, at times, focused more heavily on the Sussexes themselves rather than the athletes participating in the competition. This concern is not entirely new. In previous editions of the Games, some commentators had already noted that global media interest often spikes around the presence of Harry and Meghan, sometimes overshadowing the competitors. However, the latest reporting suggests that this imbalance may have become more pronounced in recent events. Accounts described in the book point to specific moments where the visual presentation of the Games appeared carefully managed. For example, references are made to curated footage, selected camera angles, and controlled media access, all standard practices in large-scale events, but in this case interpreted by critics as contributing to a more image-focused narrative. At the same time, some insiders reportedly expressed frustration over declining audience engagement in certain areas of the event. According to these accounts, attendance levels at specific competitions did not always match expectations, despite the high-profile nature of the Games. Critics argue that this disconnect raises important questions about how the event is being marketed and whether its core mission is being effectively communicated. Supporters of the Invictus Games, however, strongly reject these criticisms. They emphasize that the event continues to provide life-changing opportunities for wounded, injured, and sick service personnel. For many participants, the Games are not about media coverage at all, but about recovery, community, and shared experience. A spokesperson for the Invictus Games Foundation has previously stated that the focus should remain on the athletes and their journeys, highlighting both physical and psychological resilience. From this perspective, any attempt to undermine the credibility of the Games is seen as unfair to the veterans involved. Nevertheless, the contrasting narratives have fueled ongoing debate. On one side, critics argue that increased attention on celebrity presence risks diluting the original purpose of the event. On the other, supporters maintain that global visibility, regardless of how it is achieved, ultimately benefits the participants by raising awareness and support. For Prince Harry, the situation presents a complex challenge. The Invictus Games remain one of the most respected aspects of his public work, and their continued success is closely tied to his personal reputation. Any controversy surrounding the event therefore has the potential to impact not only the Games themselves, but also how his broader efforts are perceived. As discussions continue, one key question remains at the center of the debate. Can the Invictus Games maintain their original mission while navigating the realities of global media attention? The answer to that question may ultimately shape the future of one of Prince Harry's most important legacies. As the controversy surrounding Prince Harry continues to evolve, the broader implications of the latest reporting are now becoming clearer. What began as isolated concerns about brand value and sponsorship has developed into a wider debate about credibility, influence, and long-term sustainability. At the center of this discussion is the growing perception that Harry's public image has shifted significantly since stepping back from royal duties. Once widely viewed as one of the most relatable members of the royal family, he is now navigating a far more complex and competitive landscape, one where reputation directly affects opportunities. According to claims outlined by Tom Bauer, the challenges facing Harry are not limited to media criticism alone. Instead, they extend into the practical realities of funding, partnerships, and organizational trust. One key issue repeatedly highlighted in the reporting is the reaction to internal feedback. The earlier brand audit, which reportedly warned of declining support among corporate partners, was intended as a tool for course correction. However, the response to that feedback has itself become part of the story. Observers suggest that the ability to adapt to criticism is critical for any public figure operating outside a structured institution. Without that structure, decisions carry direct consequences, both reputational and financial. In Harry's case, those consequences are now being closely examined. The discussion has also reignited debate about the long-term direction of his philanthropic and media work. Projects such as the Invictus Games remain central to his public identity, but as highlighted in recent reporting, even these initiatives are not immune to scrutiny. For supporters, Harry's contributions, particularly in the area of veteran support, continue to hold significant value. They argue that despite ongoing controversies, the positive impact of his work should not be overlooked. Critics, however, point to what they describe as a disconnect between intention and execution. They suggest that the combination of high-profile media deals, public disclosures, and ongoing disputes has created a narrative that is difficult to manage. In a media environment where perception often shapes reality, this has made rebuilding trust a more complicated process. Another factor contributing to the situation is the evolving role of Meghan Markle within the couple's public image. As a globally recognized figure in her own right, Meghan brings significant attention to joint appearances and projects. However, as noted in various reports, that attention can sometimes intensify both support and criticism. This dual effect has placed the Sussexes in a uniquely challenging position. They remain highly visible and widely discussed, yet that visibility does not always translate into consistent support from institutions or sponsors. For analysts, this reflects a broader shift in how public figures are evaluated in the modern era, where influence alone is no longer enough without stability and trust. Looking ahead, experts believe that the next phase of Harry's public journey will depend heavily on strategic decisions. Will he adjust his approach based on the feedback he has received? Or will he continue on the current path? Despite the challenges outlined in recent reporting, these questions remain unanswered. What is clear, however, is that the stakes are higher than ever. The intersection of reputation, funding, and public perception means that every decision carries weight, not just for Harry personally, but for the causes and organizations connected to his name. As the story continues to develop, one thing remains certain. The narrative surrounding Prince Harry is still unfolding, and its next chapter may prove to be the most active yet.